What does Joe Average feel about what ISIS is doing, what the horror they have inflicted on the world? Well, we have a president who isn't exactly Joe Average. He says, well, we'll try to manage the problem. Well, we've got a lunch bucket guy who's vice president, and old Joe did it. He said, it's time to send the terrorists to the gates of hell. They are the words of Vice President Joe Biden. And now everyone is waiting for Mr. Obama to come with a strategy that might accomplish what his vice president talks about.
Well, defeating ISIS is one of the top items on the agenda at the NATO Summit in Wales. British Prime Minister David Cameron won't rule out any sort of military action, but both he and Obama want an international coalition to come together to fight the terrorists. Heather Sells has the story.
As world leaders meet for the NATO summit officially to discuss Ukraine and Afghanistan, the rising threat of ISIS is looming large. British Prime Minister David Cameron showed how seriously he takes that threat, telling the BBC that he's not ruling out any military action against ISIS. And he says defeating the Islamic State won't be easy.
We have to take a long-term, tough, intelligent, patient view of this. We're going to have to squeeze it out of existence. It's going to take time.
Here at home, leaders on both sides of the aisle are signaling their willingness to work with the president on what is considered a major threat, both abroad and here at home. But they want the president to come up with a clear plan of action.
I hope the president will come up with a plan and submit it to Congress next week. And I think there's highly likely that we're going to be interested in supporting him. He needs to remind everybody that this is not just some Middle Eastern dispute here. These are people who want to kill us here at home.
We'll either fight them now or we'll fight them later, because they're not going to stop.
The White House has not ruled out airstrikes against ISIS in Syria, and Cameron has said that he's interested in joining the U.S. airstrike campaign in Iraq. Both Cameron and Obama appear to suggest that NATO should play a role in containing ISIS, but more specifics are not yet clear. What is clear is a heightened sense of urgency among world leaders and a belief that a united front is needed. It's also clear that ISIS is growing stronger in its quest to create a caliphate territory in the Mideast and systematically kill any who resist. President Obama has said that ISIS will pay the price for the deaths of American journalists James Foley and Steven Sotloff. Family and friends remembered Sotloff last night at a vigil in Florida.
He was no war junkie. He merely wanted to give voice to those who had none.
It's now become well known that the 31-year-old freelancer was an Israeli citizen, but that Israel kept his Jewish faith and citizenship a secret out of concern for his safety. The U.S. is analyzing the video of Sotloff's death for clues to find his killers and other U.S. and Western hostages. They're honing in on the Syrian city of Raqqa, where the U.S. believes ISIS killed both Foley and Sotloff. The U.S. and other world leaders are also working to identify citizens from their own countries that ISIS may have lured in to fight and then return home to launch attacks. Heather Sells, CBN News.
To the gates of hell. Go get them, Joe Biden. You know, there's only one answer to ISIS, and that's to destroy them. We don't contain them, we don't manage them, we destroy them. And we put all of our resources. But just think, I mean, you're looking at Syria, it's a tiny little country, and you park a few United States warships off the coast in the Mediterranean, and you start launching some missiles in there. It's a shame. And, you know, as much as we dislike Bashar Assad, nevertheless, he wants to do something. We've got to have some help in there. And I saw yesterday the head of the Peshmerga, or at least one of the vice presidents of the Kurds in Kurdistan, says we still are not giving them any heavy weapons. They've got to, they'll fight for us, but we have to arm them. But our president won't do it. There's just this reluctance on the part of the White House to do anything positive. And we've got to move. And if we don't, our cities in America are going to be under bombardment. There are going to be bombings. There are going to be terrorist acts. And the word seems to be that on 9/11, another attack is going to happen. And soft targets, schools, churches, gathering places where civilians meet that are not hardened targets. it's going to be a mess. And we've got to root this thing out or else. Well, NATO leaders have also another crisis on their hands. Putin has really wanted to take over a good part of Ukraine. And he says, well, now I'm going to make peace, but peace on the fact that our troops are going to stay in Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have much money. They're almost bankrupt. They're in trouble. And have we helped them? Nah, not really. And yet they need our help. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
Pat, NATO's Secretary General laid a bold charge against Russia today, accusing Russia of, quote, attacking Ukraine. And he apparently questioned its reported ceasefire agreement with Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has laid out a 7-point peace plan, including the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops. But past ceasefire agreements have failed, and NATO leaders are looking for a plan to help Kiev. Other countries like Poland and Lithuania want NATO bases with troops on their land to guard against possible Russian attacks. But the U.S. and other countries are against that idea. They're working on a plan to form a rapid reaction force to counter any Russian moves against NATO members in the region. The current Ebola epidemic has now killed more people than all other outbreaks of the disease combined. The World Health Organization says more than 1,900 people have died from Ebola in West Africa, and health officials say authorities have to act quickly to contain the outbreak. New estimates indicate it could take more than $600 million to bring the epidemic under control. Pat?
600 million is peanuts considering the loss of life. 1,900 people dead so far, and I think we're understating that. This is a deadly, deadly virus. Fortunately, it is not aerosol. It is not spread by breathing like some are. So you have to touch body fluids, but it doesn't take much. And the superstition that surrounds so much of the African understanding of this disease is contributing to the problem. But in any event, that's another crisis. We've got the world, and to live in this bubble of happiness that the president seems to exude, like the only problem that we're dealing with is Facebook and Twitter. They're just exacerbating the problems. The world has always been messy, and so this is just one more example. No, it's not. The world is blowing apart because there is no leadership from the leading nation on earth. We're not leading, and we have to lead. And in this Obama thing, this Ebola thing, we can take care of that. It's not that big a deal. It's manageable. But if we don't manage it quickly, it's going to spread, and then it will be a worldwide disaster. John?
Pat, Nancy Writebol, one of the 2 Americans brought home from Liberia to be treated for Ebola, tells CBN's Lori Johnson she felt the calming presence of God while she was suffering from the disease. Lori brings us that story and the details on a 3rd American aid worker also infected with the Ebola virus.
51-year-old Dr. Rick Sacra was working for SIM treating obstetrics patients, not Ebola victims, when he tested positive for the virus. SIM is headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. They operate Christian hospitals around the world, including the West African nation of Liberia, an area hardest hit by the Ebola outbreak. Despite that danger, Dr. Sacra put himself in harm's way after he learned his 2 co-workers, Dr. Kent Brantley and Nancy Writebol, contracted Ebola and therefore left a void in the hospital.
Rick and his family are currently living in the Boston area in the U.S. Rick travels back and forth to Liberia, and he volunteered just a month ago when Dr. Brantley and Nancy were tested positive to Ebola. Rick called and said, "I'm ready to go."
Dr. Sacra is being treated in Liberia and is said to be in good spirits and talking on the phone to his family in Boston. Right now, there are no plans to bring him back to the United States for treatment. There are also no plans to give him the experimental drug ZMapp because there is reportedly none left. However, ZMapp was given to Nancy Writebol, who for the first time spoke publicly since recovering from Ebola.
But the question is usually asked, what do you think saved you? Was it the ZMapp drug? Was it the supportive care? Was it the Liberian and our U.S. health, our U.S. medical people? Was it those doctors and nurses that helped to save you? Or was it your faith? And my answer to that question is all of the above.
In a one-on-one interview, Writebol said while she knew the odds were against her survival, she felt the calming presence of God.
Peace that he gives in times of really difficult situations is a peace that we can't even explain. And it's a peace that just is overcoming, and it's a peace that says it's going to be okay, whether I live or whether I die.
And while she's grateful to be alive, she's grieved that back in Liberia, the Ebola outbreak is getting worse. Although Ebola can largely be prevented by keeping your hands clean, many West Africans don't know this and don't even have soap. That's where Operation Blessing comes in. By partnering with churches, they're handing out literature about the importance of hygiene. And they're providing liquid chlorine for disinfecting hands.
The real reason why it's spreading so much is people really haven't been educated enough to know about the dangers, especially in the remote parts of the country.
Operation Blessing is also donating supplies to treat Ebola patients and giving hospitals sterile equipment. So half a world away, Christians are on the ground in West Africa, risking their lives in order to save the lives of others. Lori Johnson, CBN News, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Pat, what an awesome testimony about the peace, the presence, and the power of God in Nancy Writebol life.
What a wonderful lady she is. And ladies and gentlemen, again, we're doing something with Operation Blessing. We are there. We are there. And we're there in the name of the Lord, but we're also there in your name. And if you want to participate, this is a tremendous suffering. This Ebola comes and it just literally liquefies the internal organs of the people who suffered, and they begin to bleed out. They bleed out through all the orifices of their bodies, and it's a hideous, horrible death. So we're there, but this is the worst outbreak. I was there some time ago in the Congo. That's where the term Ebola came from, the Ebola River in the Congo. And then it was known as Zaire. And we were working there and helping people and sending supplies in a place called Kikwit. But that outbreak they had when I was there is nothing compared to this one. This thing has grown so fast, so soon. And you heard what David Darga was saying. David's our man on the ground at Operation Blessing. So if you want to help, it's real easy to do. Just pick up the phone. It's CBN Center, Virginia Beach, the Operation Blessing, and this is the Disaster Relief Fund for the Ebola outbreak. We want to help people, and people are suffering, and we can get the supplies to them, and hopefully this thing can be contained. John?
Pat, get ready for taxes to become even more complicated. The CEO of H&R Block expects the president's health care law will add what he calls significant complexity to taxes next year. According to the Washington Examiner, CEO William Cobb says the company told market analysts that H&R Block is already taking steps to get its tax preparers ready based on the draft tax forms the IRS has already released. The new tax rules will mean penalties for people who don't have health insurance, but there could be some exemptions. And Cobb says depending on what type of exemption some people have, figuring it all out could be quite cumbersome and time-consuming. Well, if you aren't sleeping well at night, your brain could pay the price. A new study suggests a lack of a good night's sleep could cause the brain to shrink over time. Health Day News reports researchers found that parts of the brain deteriorated faster, especially in people over 60. The researchers say they aren't sure if the lack of good sleep made the brain shrink or if the shrinking brain made it harder to sleep well. The parts of the brain that got smaller included those involved with reasoning and memory. Researchers suggest people follow some simple guidelines for a better night's rest, like going to bed at the same time each night, not having a smartphone, tablet, or computer in the bedroom, and not checking emails right before going to bed, and finally staying active during the day. Pat, I'm sure you follow all of those simple rules, right?
I don't have email, so I don't have anything to check. And I believe in sleeping in a room at 65 degrees. I believe in shutting all the blinds, we don't have television. We have in the bedroom, we've got it, but we don't use it. You can't do that. So
yeah, you have to prepare your body and your brain for sleep.
Are you losing sleep, darling?
No, I'm not.
I'm glad. That's why you're so alert and intelligent, and you can remember all this.
Surely that's it.
Our brains are shrinking by the day because we don't get enough sleep. Anyhow, the more sleep, the better, up to a point.
Exactly.
So we keep telling you about these things. You know, first we have the news, we scare you to death. Then we tell you the things that keep you awake at night, and they tell you if you stay awake, you're going to be suffering. So you can't win.
Take your pick.
You can't win, but trust in the Lord and He will take care of you.
A federal judge in Louisiana has upheld the state's marriage amendment, saying that states have the right to define marriage. It is the first federal court victory for traditional marriage in more than a year. In his ruling, U.S. District Judge Martin Feldman said same-sex marriage advocates failed to prove that the amendment violates equal protection or due process provisions in the Constitution. The amendment defines marriage as a union between one man and one woman. Louisiana voters adopted it by a statewide vote of 78% back in 2004. And Al-Qaeda says it will bring its jihad to India and promises it will bring Islamic law to the entire subcontinent. 3 Indian states with high Muslim populations are on alert after Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri made the announcement in a new video this week. Zawahiri said the group will, quote, wage jihad against its enemies. Analysts say Zawahiri's message might be directed more at fellow jihadists, trying to prove that Al-Qaeda is still relevant after being overshadowed by the successes of the ISIS group in Iraq and Syria. And you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.